if you're not willing to do this, not willing to reason, and you jump to conclusions to like Colin Kaepernick was just an evil young man. I can't understand. He's not saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. It's just all wrong. If you jump to those conclusions and not trying to fully understand where he's coming from, because you don't know the pains that Brian and I may have had as young African American men, right, Brian? Mm-hmm. I don't know the pain that you, Deuce, may have had trying to roll and ball with some young black men in an all-black neighborhood and you being the only white family. I don't know those pains. But if we sit down and talk, we could be able to understand those pains, and we could be able to try to help each other overcome. And that's what we need to do. How can we overcome? And the barriers are still there, man, if we do not work together and talk and share and stop this inaction as well. And I'm sorry. You can't be apathetic to this situation. You cannot be apathetic to the cruelty, the pains that people are facing on a day-to-day basis in this country. Okay? That's sorry to spot off a little bit longer than
no.
But
that's
man,
I think that's what everybody here. I think that actually kind of gives into that wisdom I was saying that you were going to bring earlier. I mean, that kind of lays it out perfectly. It's the willingness to. I think I said this last week. The willingness to find out that you're wrong. That some things that you considered a certain way is not how things really are. And if you're able to open up with that and explain to, say, me explaining to Brian why I feel the way I do, like how we just did earlier, why I felt differently on the photo op, quote unquote, of last night than he did, and I see his side of it, and I understand where he's coming from, and I believe he understands where I'm coming from, and ultimately we find out that our goal is still the exact same. So I'm not upset that he sees something differently than I do, and he doesn't seem upset that I saw something differently, because we're still working towards that one unified goal. And I think that's the point that you clarified perfectly.
Yeah. And Brian, I came in on the tail end. If you feel like I kind of sense you feel, now I thought it was a great thing that these guys showed a sign of unity. But if we don't continue to show signs of unity continuing in the National Football League, in major pro sports as it is, as well as in our communities, it's all for naught. Is that how you were feeling?
I'll say that it's more along those lines, but I never necessarily feel. I want to make sure I make this point clear. I don't necessarily believe that I have a problem with what they did. I more or less believe that there was a better way it could have been executed. Ironically, as that may seem, because it's almost like saying, well, I don't disagree with what they did. I disagree with the method that they made, which is the entire Kaepernick argument, and to begin with. But I think that's my issue with the way the Saints went about it. I totally respect the act of solidarity. I respect it. I just think the execution was flawed, especially because it's only a small portion of what needs to be done in a grand scheme of things. I don't want it to get lost. And I think that's the problem that I have with it. If I showed you, Kyle, a picture of the Saints doing that act of solidarity, and I didn't tell you why they were doing it, but I told you what day they did it on, I'm not sure if your mind would go to, okay, well, they did it on September 26th. Well, I know around that time, in that time capsule, the whole Kaepernick thing was going on or whatever like that. I don't know if your mind would necessarily gravitate towards that idea. But if I told you that it was September 26th and I showed you that picture, your mind probably would drift to the idea with, oh, well, that's the Hurricane Katrina anniversary of the block punt and, the Steve Gleason and,
right.
all of this. I think that's where your mind would go to first.
Right.
And that's the problem that I have with that picture. I will say something really quickly on what I've been hearing you guys, and that's why I was so quiet, because I was just sitting back and taking it in. And it's the idea that I think the first step that we all have to do is do it when nobody's looking. And I think that right there needs to be the first focus at it. Because it's something I believe Powell brought up when he was speaking. It's the idea that if you're sitting around your black friends and something happens on the television, you may say a certain thing a certain way because this is you, this is your black friend, these are your black friends, this is your comfort zone. But it may or may not be the right thing to say, and you may not say it. Maybe one of them says it. You may not feel comfortable with that, but you're probably going to let it slide. And I think at that moment, maybe it's on us to kind of step up and say, you know what, that's not cool. We don't do that in this household. You can do it at your house, but we don't do it here. And, if Rev is sitting around a group of his friends and something happens on the television and, somebody may say something, and it may not be necessarily racist, but, you kind of get that racial overtone to it. It's up to Rev at that moment to say, you know what, not here. We don't do that here. And I think if that happens in many households across the country, that branches out. Because once you stop it in your house, hopefully somebody else, maybe that action is all somebody else needs to say, you know what, that's not cool. Let me not do that no more. So maybe, I don't know.
Well, let me throw in on this because I think what you're saying is powerful, and I'm going to give an example in my life. Because, like I said, and when I say this, I don't mean it to sound like I grew up hard or anything like that. But I was born and raised the south side of my town. I mean, 2 streets from one of the worst streets in town. I mean, I wasn't. This ain't Bloods and Crips, but I mean. It's the quote unquote hood. I mean, that it's just when people get that image, that's where I was born and raised. So part of that gave me this mentality to where, I mean, the right term is cultural appropriation. And while I think that gets thrown around way too much, in this sense, it's definitely true for me because that's who my friends were. I mean, I grew up with black friends. I mean, heck, the first fights I remember getting in as a kid, whether it was playing Power Rangers or having a legitimate fight was with, black kids. The first schools I went to were black schools. And eventually that evolved into more, but it brought me, I say all that to skip forward to when I was in seminary. This is after I've got saved. This is after I found Jesus, changed my life, stopped drinking, all that other stuff. And in seminary with this black man of God who is a great man. He's my age. He just got a youth position in Kansas, and I'm praying for him the best. But because of the culture I was grown in, and it was the same way with my cousin and everything, I used words that I shouldn't use. And I'm not going to repeat what I used for 2 reasons. One, everybody knows what I'm talking about. And second, because I've learned that there's a certain disrespect, whether you mean it or not, when you say that. So there's just certain things I don't say. I'm not worried about Kyle never talking to me again. If I say it, I realize that's not how it is, but people know what I'm talking about. So just put it in your head. I'm talking to him, and because that had become part of my vernacular, it comes out. Well, see, for him, he grew up in the 504. I mean, he's from South Louisiana. He grew up under that, and that irked him. I mean, it got him hot. And see, because we had come from 2 different areas, that didn't click in my mind that wasn't okay for him, regardless of who I was or where I'm from. And it goes into what you're saying, the little things. I mean, now that I've gotten a little older, gotten a little wiser, I made the decision, regardless of whether or not it has any impact on the people I'm with, friends or otherwise, I've made the decision to cut that out of my life. And that's a little thing. That's a little example of the system that we're talking about. But I've cut that out because how will that affect my brother? Will that separate me from him in our effort to try to unify not just each other, but the church, and to unify our country and our community? And I think what you said is a perfect example. It's the small things that we decide to do every day. It's how we choose to look at people and react to people. I know yesterday, and the job I'm working at now that, God blessed me with, I'm able to travel a little bit more than what I was doing before. And yesterday I was working at this location, and then as I was leaving, this young black brother pulls up and his car is just overheating. I mean, and if you would have seen us 2 together, keep in mind, anybody who's watching my Twitch right now can see what I'm dressed like. I've got the collar on. I mean, I've got that prototypical Donald Trump type haircut. I got that whole little comb over thing. I look like that solid blonde hair, blue-eyed white professional. Looks like I'm going somewhere in life. I'm going to be the CEO of something. And then I stopped to help this brother who pulls up in an old, beat-up, raggedy Monte Carlo. Like, you know the hood Monte Carlo that everybody's uncle says fast, but it ain't fast. It's just beat up to hell and back. He pulls up in that because it's overheating. And it's my decision to get out and say, hey, brother, do you need help? What's going on? And to help him figure out his problem in his car. It's little decisions like that that will take you from being that what Brian's talking about, just an image, to actually making an impact in your community, because nothing happened. I mean, I met him. The guy's name's Edward. His car was overheating. I told him, hey, from what I'm hearing here, because I've done mechanic work on my own stuff, I think you just need a new thermostat, because the engine itself is fine, but it's giving a false reading because you've got an old thermostat that's obviously not been changed in about 20 years. But just the fact that the little things in life you decide to do every day, that's what's going to change what really needs to change. The stuff that we're doing here, like on the show, speaking out, that has to happen just for the reason that more people out there will make the little adjustments in their life that get rid of this nonsense. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right with that.
Yeah. You're not wrong. You're not wrong one bit. Hey, going to church is like going to the grocery store as well, right? Some people are going to take a little bit of this and take a little bit of that home. They may not take the whole grocery store home, but they're going to take what they need, right? Let's hope this is the beginning for some people to be able to take a little bit about what you're saying and how you're being so transparent with your words, and I know you're being guided by the Lord. So, but all of this is fruit that's going to be good and inspirational, but also could it not just be inspirational? Could it lead a person to lead them into action to do the right things? And that's what we need to have more of. Let's do the right things. Let's work together, and let's work to be able to strongly unify ourselves in a common cause to end racial inequality, to be fair to as many people as possible, and to be able to love one another through all of the brokenness that we have in our hearts and in our past.
Here's my hope when it comes to everything that we've just done on the show in our little section of the world. What my hope is, it allows other people to speak, to feel the comfort of being able to speak about the topic.
Amen.
And I think that's a very important part of it. If you, I, and Kyle can sit down and discuss this, we can discuss it respectfully. Everybody can get their point across, and maybe something I said may not have been, I guess, explained the best way, but maybe Kyle can put it in a way that somebody catches on to it, or maybe Rev, you can come through and you can bring your perspective, and throughout all of the dialogue that goes on, somebody takes a part of that, and now they feel comfortable having the same discussion with someone else, and hopefully that discussion leads to action, and those actions lead to a greater good. And if that can take place, then wow, this small little ripple in the ocean can all of a sudden become a very big wave, and hopefully that's what takes place.
Amen. Yeah. Good. Well said.
Yeah. And just throw this because I realize we've gone a little over tonight. So just to kind of in closing, which we're not putting a deadline. I mean, if Kyle or Brian, y'all got anything that you feel led to add, please do. But for me, my hope with this is that words will begin to transcend into action. And what I mean by that is what we've talked about with the little things every day, who you are. But more so than that, I feel like I have to speak this point because a lot of the people that I do get to work with are more around my age, and I don't get to spend a lot of time with older men who have some wisdom because it's just not what I have around me. I do have a couple of men, and I've been blessed to have Kyle in my life, who's come in and allowed me to not just talk Saints football, but I mean, Kyle, runs Saints News. I mean, Saints News says nothing about social injustice. I mean, it says Saints football, but to have the opportunity to share this and open this dialogue, I mean, that alone shows wisdom that a lot of people don't have. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is, back last week I talked about, I feel that black culture specifically is in an identity crisis. So my main hope is that action helps bring about the knowledge and understanding that not just my culture needs, but that black culture needs to help unify, because if you don't know who you are, you can't know where you're going. And I think that this will help alleviate that and fix that problem, because once this bridge is finally built between us and there's actually that exchange of knowledge, ideas, love, philosophy, science, art, all those things that come from the